One of the hardest realities I've had to contend with in my life ever since I began to follow Jesus Christ in college was the reality that Jesus does not protect himself. Jesus doesn't protect himself. I was in conversation once with an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, and this person was given the chalice to distribute, or the precious blood of Christ. And as they're walking down the steps, at one point something happened, and the precious blood fell from their hands onto the sanctuary, and the blood of Christ everywhere. So you can imagine how mortified this person must have felt in that moment. And they get it all cleaned up, and they go back to their seats and just crying in so much shame and tears and sorrow for what just happened. But then they heard Christ speaking to them. Jesus said, "I do not protect myself. I do not protect myself. It's okay." And that's one of the deepest realities I've had to contend with, because if Christ doesn't protect himself, that means me as a follower, I'm not supposed to protect myself. Jesus Christ is the one who allows himself over and over again to be handed over. And we just watched the movie The Passion of the Christ, and what's so incredible is how receptive and passive Christ is. He allows himself to be betrayed. He allows himself to be abandoned. He allows himself to be spit upon, to be beaten, to be rejected by those he came to save. He allows himself to be handed over from Judas, his closest apostle, to the temple guards. He allows himself to be handed over to the Pharisees. He allows himself to be handed over to Pilate, then handed over to Herod, then handed over back to Pilate, then handed over to the Jews, and then handed over to the cross, all the way unto death. Jesus Christ does not protect himself. Fyodor Dostoevsky once said, "On our earth, we can only love with suffering and through suffering." On our earth, we can only love with suffering and through suffering. And if I could say there's one reason many people choose not to love in life, not to commit themselves to love, it's because there's too much suffering involved with that choice. And Jesus Christ, who is love incarnate, allows himself to suffer because that is the only way to love on earth. Sven said that on earth there is love with suffering. In hell there is suffering without love. And in heaven there is love without suffering. The way that we get to the love without suffering in heaven is by receiving the suffering that comes with love on earth. I remember when I was a priest, well, even before that, my entire relationship with the Holy Eucharist has been learning that lesson. The first time I ever walked into a church believing that Jesus Christ was actually present in the Holy Eucharist. The first time I was in college. I went to Mass all the time growing up, and I never understood that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, was present, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Holy Eucharist. And when I first learned this, I remember walking in the St. Mary's Catholic Church, and I was just walking down the side aisle towards the tabernacle. And as I went towards him, the image from the Passion of the Christ came to mind. When Veronica approaches Christ, who's been beaten and laying on the ground, and she has that cloth, and she says, "Permit me, Lord." And all she can do is console him in that moment. And I was reminded of that when I was a deacon, and I was serving at Mass with a priest who, it was one of the most objectively irreverent Masses I'd ever been to. And I had to be on the altar right next to him as a deacon. And at the moment after consecration, the priest was just, breaking all of the Eucharist, but crumbs flying everywhere. Like, it seems like he had no idea what he was doing. And I remember just burying my face behind the altar thinking, you can't be here. This can't be Jesus. God wouldn't allow this to happen to his son. And at that moment, I heard very clearly the Father saying to me, I am here, and he is here, and you are here. And you must allow the same thing to happen to you as a priest. I realized it was too late for me to come back on my vows at that point because I was already a deacon. But that realization, Jesus does not protect himself. And the way we understand Jesus Christ is the way that we follow Jesus Christ. And this liturgy is stripped today. Everything's stripped. The altar is stripped. Everything's covered. Christ is gone from the tabernacle. And so it should feel very bare to us. But the way we know that we're doing liturgy right is not when we use all the externals to protect us, to keep us concealed from the world, sheltered from life. But true liturgy will always lead us to become like Jesus Christ, to accept the suffering that comes with love, and to offer ourselves in that same spirit of total surrender. Jesus Christ does not protect himself. And that's how you discern your vocation. And one priest said this, I thought this was really good. He said, most people look for their vocation on Mount Tabor, the Transfiguration, when the only true place to find out where you're called in life is Calvary. Because that's what love looks like in this world. Love and suffering. Pope Benedict wrote on this day, reflecting on Christ's crucifixion, when the shepherd of humanity, the living God himself, became a lamb, he stood on the side of the lambs with those who are downtrodden and killed. Because it is not power, but love that redeems us. God, who became a lamb, tells us that the world is saved by the crucified one, not by the power of those who crucified him. Therefore, to be a shepherd means to love, and loving means being ready to suffer. That is how we are saved. That's the proclamation of Good Friday. We are saved not by power, but by suffering, by weakness, by surrender. And that means every single one of us is capable of that kind of love in life. You don't have to be really strong and powerful and Christian Dail Batman in order to be saved. You have to be willing to endure suffering. That's it. You have to be willing to accept your weaknesses. And you have to be willing to stay in relationship wherever you are called. To allow ourselves to be handed over. That's how the world is redeemed. Jesus doesn't protect himself. He allows himself to be handed over. And in one moment, he will allow himself to be handed over by me into every single one of you. May we not only receive him, but pray to become him, to become love, to become a gift, And through our sacrifice, through our suffering, through our willingness to not protect ourselves, many may come to salvation through us.